teacher. Quietly carrying the weight of his past. A new neighbor. Seeking warmth in a cold, unfamiliar town. And one snowy night, their lives unexpectedly intertwined. What started as a simple act of kindness became the beginning of something extraordinary. Hi everyone, welcome to Emotional Lines. James was a 35-year-old ordinary math teacher. He worked at a local high school and was well liked by his students for his sense of humor and understanding nature. But outside of school, his life was filled with silence and loneliness. Once upon a time in another city, James had started his life full of excitement and hope after graduating from college. However, a relationship he had back then, followed by poor choices and a chaotic period where he lost touch with himself, had turned him into a different person. In an attempt to rebuild his life, James had moved to this new city, creating a stable routine for himself. Yet, escaping his past proved to be harder than he had imagined. To those who knew him, James appeared calm and easygoing. But deep inside, he was still a man haunted by the shadows of his past. His only friend was Mark, the school's basketball coach. Mark, being outgoing and full of life, tried to bring some energy into James's world but eventually learned to respect his boundaries. The two often played basketball quietly in the school gym after classes, enjoying these shared moments without the need for words. For James, these games were a silent comfort and a brief escape from his own mind. Winter hit the town harder than expected. As weather reports warned of an incoming snowstorm, James and Mark decided to hurry and get new winter tires for James's car. Mark, a local, knew the best tire shop in town, and the drive was filled with his lively chatter, making the trip enjoyable for James. After getting the new tires, James was pleased they had acted early. Mark, accustomed to James's quiet nature, didn't mind the silence and used it as a chance to express himself freely. But on their way back, James suddenly hit the brakes. In the yard of a house by the road, a woman was struggling with a large tarp. The snow was falling heavily, and it was clear she was having a hard time. James pulled over and said, "Let's give her a hand." Mark and James got out of the car and approached the woman. "Hi there, do you need any help?" James asked politely. The woman hesitated briefly before saying, "Thank you," though her voice carried a sense of quiet desperation. Mark, less patient, chimed in with a grin, "Come on, it's obvious you're stuck. We're just trying to help." The woman finally let out a sigh and dropped the tarp. "I just moved in yesterday," she admitted, frustrated. "This was the only house I could find, but the roof is leaking. I thought I could cover it with this tarp before the snow gets worse, but it's impossible." If you've made it this far and you're enjoying the story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Mark chuckled lightly. James nudged him with his elbow to keep him quiet, then turned to the woman. "Would you mind if we took a look?" he asked. The woman, clearly out of options, gestured toward the house and let them in. The roof was leaking badly. James frowned and said, "This needs a professional to fix it." Mark quipped, "A professional? Who needs that when you've got a math teacher?" James shot Mark a mock-annoyed look, but he couldn't help smiling internally. The woman, despite herself, let out a small laugh at Mark's remark. James stepped outside and brought the tarp inside. Turning to the woman, he asked, "Do you have scissors and a stapler?" She immediately started rummaging through a few boxes. It was obvious she had just moved in with everything still packed away. Meanwhile, Mark asked, "What's your name?" The woman replied, "Emily." "I'm Mark and this is James," Mark introduced them, adding with a grin, "James doesn't talk much, so if you've got any questions just ask me." The joke made both Emily and James chuckle. James managed to patch up the roof temporarily. "This should hold for the night, but you'll need to get a professional to fix it first thing tomorrow," he said. Emily, grateful, offered them coffee, but Mark and James exchanged a glance and politely declined, saying, "We should get going." They didn't want to overstay their welcome. On the way back, Mark teased James, "Looks like Emily has her eye on you, buddy." James was used to these kinds of jokes, but this time Mark's words stirred something inside him. There was indeed something about Emily that intrigued him, though he couldn't quite figure out what it was. When James got home, he took a warm shower and lit the fireplace. Watching the snow fall outside, he felt a sense of calm. But in the middle of the night, he woke up suddenly. The embers in the fireplace were still glowing, but he realized the power had gone out. Looking for his phone, he noticed 3 missed calls from Mark. He immediately called back. "Mark, what's going on?" he asked, concerned. Mark replied, "Oh, James, I'm fine. But the snowstorm outside is insane. Every station is warning people not to go out." James looked out the window. The storm had blanketed the streets and houses in thick white snow. "Are you okay? Do you need anything?" Mark asked. "No, I'm good," James replied, but he couldn't stop thinking about Emily, alone in that house during the snowstorm. Sitting by the fire watching the storm intensify, James couldn't calm his thoughts. Mark's words echoed in his mind, and the howling wind outside heightened his unease. He couldn't help but wonder how Emily was doing, all alone in that house. The temporary patch he had made on her roof might not hold up in such a storm. Reaching for his phone, he realized he didn't have Emily's number. The thought of not being able to contact her made him even more restless. "Maybe I'm just overthinking," he told himself, but a voice inside insisted he wasn't. He thought about the faint exhaustion and helplessness on Emily's face. She had just moved in, didn't know anyone in the area, and was living in a house with a leaking roof. James took a deep breath. He knew going out in this weather was dangerous, but his conscience wouldn't let him sit still. Putting on his coat and thick boots, he grabbed a flashlight. As he picked up his car keys, he muttered to himself, "If I wasn't so thoughtful, I'd be asleep right now." But to quiet his mind, he got into his car and headed toward Emily's house. The roads were nearly impassable due to the snowstorm. The car's headlights barely pierced the darkness, and the wind occasionally rocked the vehicle. Driving slowly and cautiously, James eventually made it to Emily's house. He knocked on the door several times but got no response. The windows were dark, so he assumed the power was out here too. His concern grew. He knocked again and finally he heard movement inside. Emily opened the door, wrapped in a blanket. Her face was a mix of surprise and exhaustion. "James? Did you really come here in this weather?" she asked, her voice shaky but filled with genuine relief. James stepped inside and quickly surveyed the room. It was cold and the floor was damp from the leaking roof. Emily was clearly freezing. "I noticed the power was out and wanted to check on you," James said, assessing the situation. Emily smiled, but it was a tired smile. "I don't know what to do. The roof started leaking again and it's freezing in here. I was trying to organize my stuff, but I just don't have the energy anymore." James took a deep breath and glanced back at the leaking ceiling. "I can patch it up temporarily," he said with determination. "But you can't stay here for long, it's way too cold." Emily shrugged slightly. "It looks like I don't have a choice. I have to stay here." James got to work quickly, using the materials at hand to make another temporary repair. When he finished, the house was still freezing cold. Emily, wrapped tightly in her blanket, watched James silently as he worked. "This will hold for now, but it's too cold for you to stay here," James said. Emily looked at him helplessly. James hesitated for a moment. He thought about inviting Emily to his home, but he worried it might come off as inappropriate. Instead, he decided on a different solution. "There's heat in my car," he said. "At least we can warm up there. We need to find someplace warm rather than sitting here freezing." Emily hesitated at first, but seeing the seriousness in James's expression, she nodded. "Okay, that sounds more sensible." They moved to James's car. James immediately turned on the heater, and the warmth spread quickly through the cabin. Emily's face started to brighten, and she let the blanket slide off her shoulders as she quietly warmed her hands for a while. "You didn't have to do all this," she said finally, clearly touched by James's kindness. James leaned back against the seat and smiled softly. "No one should be alone in this kind of cold," he said. "There were many times I wished for someone to help me. That's why I think it's important to help when I can." Emily looked at him, the sound of the storm's wind howling outside filling the space between them. "I knew it would be hard adjusting to a new place," she said, "but I didn't think I'd feel this lonely." James grew quiet at her words, reflecting on his own loneliness. The feeling was heavy and familiar. "Loneliness can sometimes be harder than anything else," he said at last. "But it seems like you've learned to be strong because of it." Emily smiled faintly at his words. "Being strong wasn't really a choice," she replied. "But being alone was never my preference." That night, James and Emily forged a quiet bond in the warmth of the car. Two solitary souls found solace in each other during the storm. Neither of them realized that this moment would become the spark that would change their lives. Through the night, they stayed in the car, talking and sharing stories of their past struggles and loneliness. As they opened up, the connection between them deepened, revealing just how much both of them had been stuck in their past without realizing it. By morning, James called Mark, who showed up with a portable heater and a handyman. With proper tools to fix the roof and a temporary way to heat the house, Emily was finally able to feel more comfortable. Emily thanked James and Mark profusely. While she expressed her gratitude, James realized he didn't want to leave her. But Mark's cheerful jokes helped him mask his emotions. On the drive back, Mark couldn't resist teasing James. So what's next? You're going to check on her when it's too hot in the summer? Oh, I just wanted to see if you're okay, Mark said with a laugh. James denied it as usual, but Mark was sure there was something between him and Emily. James, on the other hand, couldn't stop wondering if he'd ever see her again. To him the odds seemed slim. The next day, schools were closed due to the snow, and James spent the day with Mark. Still, his thoughts kept drifting back to Emily. Her warm smile and the connection they'd shared during the night stayed vivid in his mind, offering a rare reprieve from the pain of his past. When James returned to school the following day, Emily was still on his mind. He realized he hadn't dwelled on his past since meeting her. It felt as though she had brought a spark of hope into his life. At lunch, James walked into the teacher's lounge and froze in surprise. Emily was sitting at the table. She looked equally shocked to see him. "You? James?" she asked, her voice filled with disbelief. Just then Mark walked in with a big grin. "Oh, by the way, I forgot to mention while you were fetching that tarp, Emily told me she's starting as the new literature teacher here." "Surprise?" he said, quickly leaving the room. James couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of it all. He hadn't believed in such coincidences for a long time, but meeting Emily again felt like a sign. The story of Emily and James would begin like a fairy tale, holding only the promise of the future. After all, when the weight of the past becomes too heavy to bear, the best choice is to leave it behind. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If this story touched your heart, please give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe for more emotional and inspiring tales. We'd also love to hear your thoughts. Share them in the comments below. Until next time, stay safe and stay kind.